The Text Collector is the newest project from Halifax-based multidisciplinary artist Leanne Hoffman. The songwriter, poet, and visual artist's sophomore album was released in June of this year, along with her first self-published book by the same name. The book contains the 365 poems written over the course of a year that became the songs on The Text Collector. Produced by award-winning producer Aaron Costello and Hoffman herself, the album deconstructs poetry and pop music, rebuilding the pieces into a listening experience even richer than the sum of its parts. With the swirling melodies and glitzed-up production of Top 40, Leanne builds tension between soundscapes primed for pure pleasure and lyrics that address the interconnected relationship between desire and despair. Paired with 4 videos and 8 handmade art pieces, The Text Collector is a multimedia art project representing 365 days of introspection. You can find the album, the book, and the visuals for The Text Collector through her website, leannehoffman.com, and on her Instagram, HMLeanne. Today's podcast is sponsored by the Songwriter's Piano, an easy-to-use app for songwriters and lyricists to use when coming up with song ideas when there's no instrument around or nobody to play one. With the Songwriter's Piano, one can easily play commonly used pop songwriting chord sequences at the touch of a screen, in any key, in 3 different chord variations, all played on a gorgeously recorded grand piano. Download the Songwriter's Piano by Play Like Me apps today, found on both iOS and Android stores everywhere. Welcome to Women in the Music Industry, the podcast that shines a spotlight on the remarkable women who are breaking barriers and making their mark in an industry that has long been dominated by men. I'm your host, Rob Wells, and I'm thrilled to have you join us on this empowering journey. Each episode of this podcast will be dedicated to exploring the inspiring stories, accomplishments, and struggles of the extraordinary women who have defied the odds and made waves in the music business. Together, we'll delve into the journeys of female artists, songwriters, producers, musicians, managers, executives, and all those who have helped play a pivotal role behind the scenes. We'll uncover the stories that deserve to be heard, as well as celebrate the triumphs, challenges, and unique perspectives that women bring to the music industry. Whether you're a fan of music, an aspiring artist, or simply curious about the inner workings of the music business, this podcast will offer a valuable perspective. Together, we'll celebrate the power of music and the strength of these inspiring women. So join us as we amplify their voices and together pave the way for a future where women in the music business are no longer the exception, but the rule. Welcome to another episode of Women in the Music Industry. For those of you who are joining us for the first time, welcome to the show. For those who have been here before, welcome back. I am truthfully like a little kid in a candy store right now, because if you had told me many moons ago, that one day I would be hanging out with the one and only Lee Aaron, well, let's just say that I wouldn't have believed a single word, because Lee Aaron, I'm such a huge fan. Can you tell? Lee Aaron is one of Canada's most iconic vocalists, a songwriter, producer, and fearless reinventor. She was one of the very first women writing and performing hard rock, releasing her first album, The Lee Aaron Project, at the age of only 19. Her sophomore released 1984's Metal Queen solidified Lee as a trailblazer for women in rock in the 80s with the title track, an anthem of feminine empowerment and shout out against the sexism towards women in that genre, garnering her respect and legions of rock fans around the globe, including yours truly. Over the years, it has become an enduring album of empowerment for men and women alike. Lee Aaron went on to work with producers such as Bob Ezrin of Alice Cooper and Pink Floyd fame, Peter Coleman of Blondie and Pat Benatar fame, and appear on the Scorpions' Savage Amusement album, singing backgrounds after producer Dieter Dierks heard her perform live while recording her 1987 concert in Mannheim, Germany, with his mobile studio. Wow. Later releases 1989's, we're only like halfway through this bio right now. Later releases 1989's Body Rock and 1991's Some Girls Do both reached multi-platinum status and included chart toppers like What You Do to My Body, amazing song, and Hands On, another amazing song. She has shared stages with Heart, Bon Jovi, Joan Jett, Suzi Quatro, Sinead O'Connor, Motley Crue, Van Morrison, and more. Chart magazine proclaimed Lee Aaron's Body Rock album as one of the 20 most influential Canadian albums of the 80s, with Alanis Morissette and Shania Twain both under Lee Aaron's influence. Holy smokes. 17 albums into her enduring career, 17, with multiple accolades, including 10 Juno nominations, CMPA Songwriters, Much Music Video, Music Express, and Toronto Music Awards. She is still going strong. Absolutely. In 2016, Aaron was honored with a permanent star on the Arts Walk of Fame in her former hometown of Brampton, Ontario, Canada, for her contribution to Canadian music. How amazing. In 2004, Aaron took a decade-long hiatus to raise her family with husband drummer John Cody, but blazed back onto the scene in 2016 with Fire and Gasoline, meeting rave reviews. With a wealth of new original material and a refreshed rock sound, she has released 5 albums since, all of which she self-produced. Absolutely incredible. I love that. World-renowned mix engineer Mike Fraser of AC/DC, Aerosmith, and Bryan Adams fame has worked alongside Lee and the band on her last 2 albums, bringing his trademark kick-ass sounds to Radio On in 2021 and Elevate 2022, her latest release. Elevate was recorded with Aaron's crack band, which is Sean Kelly on guitar, John Cody on drums, and Dave Reimer on bass at the Armory Studios in Vancouver, Canada. 10 original tracks steeped in what has become Aaron's signature sound, which is big guitar hooks, powerful bluesy vocals, rich melodies and harmonies, and just enough sassy attitude to tip the scales. Whew, man, that's a great bio. Hi, Lee. How are you?
Yeah, I'm doing great. Happy to be here today.
Oh, I'm so happy that you're here. I'm thrilled beyond belief. I first was thrilled a couple of years ago when I think you reached out to me on Instagram. You replied to something that I had posted, and I just thought, no way, is this really Lee Aaron? And then we had a bit of a conversation, and then you've been so cool. Since then, we've just been going back and forth. And then I said, would you have any interest in being on this podcast? Of course, you graciously said, absolutely. And here we are. So truly like a kid in a candy store, I am right now to have you here.
Well, thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here. Sorry. I feel like I need to mention this because it's coming up next week. But sort of the icing on the cake of your lovely biographical intro that you've given me. I don't know if you're aware, but I'm getting a star on Canada's Walk of Fame this year as well.
Oh, that's great. That's great.
So I know it came as a little bit of a surprise, but the Walk of Fame people, this year is the 25th anniversary of Canada's Walk of Fame. And they decided that they wanted to do something unique and special to celebrate their 25th anniversary. And they came up with this idea, Canada's Rock of Fame. And they are celebrating, I believe it's myself and 12 other notable Canadian rock artists that they feel maybe I don't know, didn't get their due, or were quite influential on the Canadian scene in anywhere from the late 70s to the early 90s in Canada. And they're reviving this night. Like next week, there's a big celebration on the 28th of September, Massey Hall, and all of like the old 80s VJs are coming back. I believe Jeannie Becker is, Steve Anthony, Erica M, Mike Williams, like they're all, Chris Ward, they're all going to be there. And it's sort of it's going to be this big love in of the whole Much Music era, because that was such an influential era, I in Canada, when the whole MTV and Much Music scene started to explode. It was now this opportunity for artists to be able to show their work visually in the medium of video, and it was so powerful. And there were so many bands that were at the forefront of that scene in Canadian music. And so that the whole night's about celebrating and honoring them. I mean, to be honest with you, I think that surprisingly, there's some bands maybe that should be there, but I wasn't the deciding committee, right? I'm just really unbelievably honored that I get to be included in that group of musicians that are going to be honored.
I would be upset beyond belief if you weren't on that list, because you are just definitely, you should be in the Rock of Fame, Canada's Rock of Fame, absolutely.
Oh.
And the Walk of Fame, because when I think of rock music in Canada, I think of you. I think of great productions, great songwriting, and just really just influencing so many people that heard your music and just thought, wow, if that exists, then that's the benchmark, and let me try to make something just like that as well. Yeah, you're a huge influence on so many people. So congratulations on that, and so well deserved. That's fantastic.
Well, thank you. I always say if I've influenced one girl to pick up a guitar or to sit at the piano, learn a little production and write a rock song, then my job is accomplished. That's all my goal really ever was to empower, women musically to be the best that they can be.
Mm-hmm. And you absolutely have been doing that all your career. I know a lot of people that definitely point to you as their source of inspiration for doing what it is that they do. So you've done a great job and a great service for that. Now I'm just wondering, how can I get tickets to come see this? Because I would not kill to be there, but pretty close. I would want to be.
Yeah, sadly, I think it's sold out like almost immediately the night. And I also know that I did have to buy one ticket for a friend that wanted to come, and they were fairly pricey. But I'm hoping it's going to be televised. I'm not 100% sure, but
cool. Yeah. And hopefully this is just year one of many that you were saying that there's some other bands that should be in there. So maybe they'll do it again next year, or maybe it's every few years that they'll do this. But
I have no idea how the whole sort of system works and what the qualifying criteria is. I know Carol Pope, myself, and Lorraine Segato from Parachute Club are, I think, some of the only females in the group being inducted. And I'm sure they have their particular reasons. Carol, of course, being such a huge influence on the LGBTQ community, and being one of the first woman in Canada to actually be forward about that and unabashed about it. She completely deserves to be there. And so I don't really know what their defining criteria is for making those selections, but I just was, when I got the phone call, I was like, really? Oh, me? I'm not going to say no. So I was, quite honored.
Oh, so cool. So cool. That's amazing. Congratulations for that. That's huge, but it's so well deserved. Absolutely. We're hearing what is coming up right now, but can we hear sort of all the backstory? Like, how does somebody get inducted into the Rock of Fame? How did you start at the very beginning? And did you have a dream that one day these things would be happening, or did you just have a musical bone in your body? Were you just really driven towards music? Did you have a musical background? How did it all begin for you?
My mother sang to us when we were kids. And when my mother was singing, we knew it would be a good day. She was in a great mood. And so I think when I was a child, and my mother had a beautiful voice, she sang in church choir my entire life. Like, she was very involved, and just a voice like a songbird. And so I think when I was a young child, I really equated my mother singing along to the radio around the house with happiness. I knew that it was when my mom was full of joy when she was singing. And so that's, for me, I think where it really started was I knew that, I equated singing and music with joy. And I guess because my mother was musical, I must have inherited it from her. My father couldn't sing his way out of a paper bag. So, so that, evident. And there are musical people within my family on both sides. My father's side, I have a cousin who's an opera singer. I have some other cousins that are very involved in worship music on the East Coast. And there's definitely musicality in my family. But the truth is, did I have a dream? Yeah, I had a dream. I was very, very influenced by, a lot of the Toronto artists and that whole scene when I was a kid. One of the stories I've told a few times, I think I was 14 or 15 years old, and Max Webster came and played my high school when I was that age. They did this thing where they did a tour of some of the high schools. They played the theater in the daytime, and then on the weekend they came back and they did an evening concert. And just seeing them when I was that age, and they were commercial, but they were prog, they were bizarre, they were flamboyant, and it was just like eye candy for me as a young girl. And I was just like, wow, if these guys can, Kim Mitchell up there in a crop top and his crazy long hair, playing amazing guitar, singing, stockings, he had sparkly red high heels. And I was like, if these guys can be this weird and do this, like I can, maybe there's a place for a girl doing hard rock, because there weren't really any women in Canada doing hard rock at that time. But I was very involved in whatever I could get myself involved in musically in school. I was in the jazz band and the concert band. Yes, I started out playing E-flat, alto sax, and keyboards in my first band.
Do you still play sax?
No, not really anymore. I'm sure I could get a sound out of it if I picked one up, but I kind of, let it slide about 20 years ago. I haven't picked one up in a while, but so I was very involved in musical theater as well. Our school, my high school, Central Peel Secondary in Brampton, when I was a kid, we were fairly renowned for our musical theater program and the musicals that the teachers were able to produce. And I was very involved in that. And I was singing in a musical, Babes in Arms, when I was 15 years old. And the bass player who went to my high school, he was in grade 12, was involved in a local rock band, saw me sing. And at the time, they were looking for a singer for their band. Now, their band was comprised of the bass player, of course, went to my high school, a drummer and a guitarist from the neighboring high school in Bramalea. They were kind of prodigies from the music program, and they'd formed this rock band, and they were looking for a singer. And when he heard me sing in the musical, he said, I really want you to come and audition for our band. And so I went home and I was like, hey, Mom and Dad, I got invited to audition for a rock band. And this was kind of my sideline dream. And my mom's like, you're not going to go down there and to an audition with a bunch of teenage boys in a basement. And so my father, of course, was chaperoned and took me, and I auditioned. And I was among several other people that auditioned. And there was a bit of a vibe at that time amongst the other members of the band that was like, well, they were a little surprised that Graham, the bass player, had brought me in, because they weren't really looking for a girl singer at the time.
Yeah.
But I was the only, apparently, of all the people that auditioned, I sang better than all of the boys, and I had a more powerful voice. And so it was decided that I would join this band. And so from 15 to when I graduated, when I was 18, I was very, very invested. We learned a bunch of covers. We started writing original material. And that is the band that became Lee Aaron. The Lee Aaron Band. And then when I was 18 years old, the summer I graduated, we all graduated, we played a concert at the Chinguacousy Bandshell. It was like a local outdoor summer festival show, and we managed to get hired onto that. And the gentleman who became our first manager saw us perform. I guess there was a little bit of a buzz, because I believe we had recorded some demos and entered them into a Q107 like amateur contest, and had gotten some airplay. And he came down to see us and then approached us. And that was sort of the beginning of it all. And he managed Frank Soda and the Imps, mm-hmm. and a couple of other bands, and asked us, would we like to go on the road? And we were like, yay, yes, we do. Of course we do. And that's sort of how it started.
What was your mother at this point saying? You're not going to go on the road with three 19-year-old boys?
He was, well, this was the deal is there was another gentleman in our band. He was older. I think, was in his early 20s. Um, I have such great memories. He was such a lovely, lovely man, and he ended up on the road with us, and he became my chaperone. Because when I first went on the road, I wasn't even old enough to drink.
Wow.
And I had scholarships. So my parents are going, university, her going on the road and trying to pursue her dreams. So this was always in my back pocket. Because I did quite well academically in school. I had a couple of scholarships, and they were like, the deal was that I struck with my parents was like, let me give it 1 or 2 years. And if it doesn't start things don't start to happen for us, I will give it all up and I'll go back. I'll go to the Humber music program or fashion design or whatever. I was interested in just the arts at that point in time. So yeah, we ended up going on the road, but it was a slow upward trajectory from that point. It was very, very different in the early 80s than it is now, in that there just wasn't the saturation that there is now with social media and the internet. I came up in an era where rock stars could still be made. You tried to get that record deal. And if you got a record deal, it meant that they were going to invest money in you and try to build your career. That doesn't exist so much anymore.
No.
That type of industry, which is kind of sad,
Yeah. Yeah. You really have to do everything on your own now instead of
absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. I tell everybody, it's kind of like you're the baseball player at home plate and you have to get all the way from home plate to first base to second base to third base before anybody else joins forces with you. You got to do a lot on your own.
That is quite true. But with that said, we were quite industrious as a little band on our own. The gentleman, Ray, who I was telling you about, he was older than the rest of us. He'd graduated a few years prior. He had a full-time job, and he owned the PA. He bought the first Polymoog that came into Canada. We had a 4-track TAC recording machine, which evolved into an 8-track. And so when I was like 16 years old, I knew how to operate an 8-track TAC machine, and I was recording on my own and working with the band, and we were doing demos, and I was playing, I'm trying to think of some of the other, he had one of the first mini Moogs that would never stay in tune, those old things, nor would the Polymoog at first. He had an old ARP, and I was playing these keyboards and working with the band, and we were doing a lot of our own recording. And so I was learning some of this early, analog technology, 40 years ago, which was really fun. That was sort of my first introduction to production. Right?
I love that you were interested in it. Like there's a lot of people that can't even mention the names of all those different pieces of gear that you were just talking about right there. But I love that you were interested in tinkering with it and learning how to do it and actually like recording, getting, the first inklings of production under your belt at that young age. That's amazing. There's a lot of people that shy away from that and they just think, I'm just going to stick with the writing of the music and the performing of music, but the technical side of things, I'll leave that to somebody else.
Not so secret geek. I don't know. Well, not many people know that about me, but yeah. Of course, when we ended up getting our first record deal, everything somewhat shifted. We got our first manager, and the first thing he did was pull me out from behind the keyboards. He said, you should be the front person. You're the girl, you're attractive, you got a great voice. That was kind of the mindset back then as well, right? Was, it was a very, very different era in that if you were a woman in a band, you weren't really encouraged to be sitting behind a keyboard or to be playing guitar. You were encouraged to be, especially if you were attractive, we need to put you up front in front of the microphone and we're going to find you a bunch of songs. I was always a songwriter as well. And so that was something that I felt that I kind of fought against quite a bit in the beginning was, becoming a commodity, because that era of music was, and like we were discussing before we even started this podcast, was very much run by men, even more so, even though there aren't a lot of women on the industry side, even today, much more so back then. And so I felt like I was always sort of fighting against becoming, what the suits thought their idea of who I should be, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. On the first record, did you have a passion to produce it yourself? Was that very much in you to did you communicate that to everybody that you'd like to continue with moving past the 4-track and the 8-track and actually, doing the final record?
Well, I always had a passion to be involved in the production, but truthfully, when I started, and I was that young, I was 18, 19 years old, and we met my first manager, who was also a producer. So I kind of got plucked out of this high school band and thrown into this situation where suddenly it was sort of, I was in a big studio, and I was, truthfully, when I was younger, I was quite intimidated at first, because I thought, wow, that's this gigantic SSL console is totally foreign to me. So I was happy to take a step back and observe and learn for the first few years, because I really didn't know what I was doing in a giant studio. But I had opinions about, sounds and the different colors I wanted to hear on an album, for sure.
Very cool. Very cool. Something you just mentioned there, that you'd been, writing songs for a while. When did you start writing songs in your career?
Oh, super young, like in my teens. Yeah. I don't know how good some of those first songs were, but you got to start somewhere.
Of course, but this was before you got into the band. You were writing songs on your own as you were doing music theater acts at your high school, and then you started to write for that band as well. And then your first record, is that pretty much you writing everything on there, or is it you and the band?
No, my first album, our first manager, it's called the Lee Aaron Project. I don't know if you're aware of that. What he did was he put me together with some other musicians, some guys from Toronto band Moxie, Santers. Frank Soda wrote me a song. So I was involved a little bit in the writing of that album. I co-wrote several of the songs on that album, but he also had people write for me. Again, this was this kind of mindset that, well, we're not going to take the time to let her write her whole first album. We're going to put her with a bunch of musicians and get this thing. Let's push this out of the gate when she's 19 years old. Right. And that's sort of how my first album came together. Again, I cannot really emphasize enough how I kind of got thrown into the fire, when our first manager took over. I very quickly, he put us out on the road, let's go learn your chops. I remember he took me to the movie theater to see the movie The Rose with Bette Midler. Do you remember that?
I do. Yeah.
And so there was, a little bit of a Svengali kind of vibe there with like, here, you see that? Go be like that. You can do theater. And so I was given there was a lot of massaging going on in the very first few years of my career in terms of who I should be, how I should behave on stage. I mean, it was all within the genre of hard rock, which I was happy to be doing, because that's where my heart was. Mm-hmm. But, I felt pulled in a few different directions early on in terms of how I should be dressing, the way I should be marketing. And let's be honest, my early marketing was very, quite sexualized as well. It was sort of, I went to my first photo session. I'd never done a photo session before. And they were like, there's art direction there. And they're like, there's a racket. They're like, hey, the wardrobe lady thought you'd look good in this. And I was sort of like, I was like a kid in a candy store. I was like, oh, okay, I guess this is how I'm supposed to be, and this is what I'm supposed to wear, and this is how I'm supposed to look on my cover. So I was a little bit, I wouldn't say a victim of that, but I hate that word victim, number one, in the first place. Because I don't look at anything in my past that way. But I definitely was influenced and pulled in some different directions in the very beginning that maybe weren't exactly where I saw myself, but I was very naive and I didn't really understand that, certainly back then, that I was able to stand up and go, no, you know what, this doesn't feel comfortable for me. That took me a few years to get to that place. And but when I did get there, I did start standing up for myself and saying, this is where I see myself, and this is where I see my image going, and this is where I see the sound going. But, I was, again, a teenager kind of thrown into this without a lot of confidence initially. And it took me the first few years to find my footing, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. I'm just curious to know, because it was the 80s and because it was very, male dominated in the industry. It still is, but very much so back then. What was the reaction to when you were putting your foot down and saying, no, I actually have a different way of thinking, and I would like to be portrayed this way. I would like to have my image this way. I'd like to have my sound this way. Was it welcomed, or was it a bit of a fight for you?
We used to have this saying that, back in the industry in the 80s, that if you were a man and you stood up for what you wanted, you were perceived as difficult. But if you were a woman that stood up for what you wanted, they called you something different. So yeah, about 4 albums in, I know we had and I've told this story several times. The up until that point, maybe I'm not articulating this particularly well, but I'm trying to. Up until that point, I'd worked with some of the world's biggest producers, and we'd had certainly a modicum of success, but maybe not the massive, massive success that the label was hoping for. So I remember we were in a boardroom meeting, myself and my co-writer, John Albany. We had written most of the albums together. We dabbled a bit with co-writing. We'd flown to LA and Nashville a few times to write with other people. But for the most part, just about every single time, this first single off the record was something that John and I had written together. And I remember we had a boardroom meeting with the label, and there was a big producer from the States in that meeting. And they were extremely excited because he wanted to produce our 5th album. They were discussing budgets and how many points he was going to get on the record. But one of the things that got brought up in that meeting was the fact that he'd listened to the demos for Body Rock, and he didn't really hear any of our songs. And I remember John and I sitting there looking at each other going, okay, but there was talk about the fact that he was involved with another publisher in the States, and he had some songs he thought would be good for us. And I remember we got out of that meeting, and the producer left. And again, the label heads, they were still buzzing with excitement because I don't want to say the name, but it was a very big US producer who had produced some huge 80s hard rock bands. And, they were talking about, timeline and money. And John and I, we stood up and we were like, he doesn't really like any of our songs. So did it ever occur to anybody in this meeting, maybe he's not the right guy, maybe he's not the right guy. And that had just never really occurred to anybody, because the 80s industry, it was just very much run by money. Very propelled by money and success and getting this name or that name. And so, yeah, at that point, I put my foot down and said, we don't want to work with him. And they were like, the jaws dropped in the room, and they were like, what do you mean? But he's responsible, or we feel he's responsible for the success of this band and this band and this band. And, one thing that I have learned over the years, and certainly from a production values point of view, is that the best producers listen. and they listen really well. And they listen for that magical moment, and they listen for that hook. And then they encourage the artist to, springboard off that best idea or that best hook that they're hearing. They encourage them to be the best that they can be, the best of themselves, rather than pulling them in a completely different direction or giving them songs that they think are best for them. And, so at that point in time, we did put our feet down. I put my foot down and said, no, I don't want to work with that guy, because I want to do my songs, because we believe strongly in this material. And so, and I get it. The label, instead of investing $250,000 in the next record, they cut the budget. They just said, look, if you're not going to work with Joe Big, we're going to, here, go make your record. And I think we had $60,000 to make the album, which is a lot of money today, but it was a drop in the bucket in 1988. They said, okay, here's this much money, go make your record. We didn't even have enough money to hire a real drummer and a real bass player. We brought a programmer up from LA, and John Albany and I worked with this programmer, programming the bass and drums for Body Rock. And our A&R guy, Brian Allen at the label, who was, he had been in the band Toronto, if you remember, and he also co-wrote What About Love for Heart, and they'd had a big hit with that. And lovely gentleman, very talented, musically extremely astute. And they said, why don't you work with Brian, our A&R? And we went and we, worked with the material, and we worked with the programmer, and we made Body Rock on a very small budget. And it ended up being my most successful album in Canada. And I truly believe that is because we trusted our instincts, and to me, that was more, finally, I'd made a quintessential Lee Aaron record, the album that sounded the most like me of anything I'd ever done. So that was a circumstance under which I put my foot down, and yeah, that was the result. So.
And what a difference it is. I remember hearing that record for the first time, and my immediate thought, I was probably about 17, 18 when I heard this, but I remember hearing this and just thinking, no way that this was made in Canada. This doesn't sound like anything that I've ever heard coming out of Canada. It is huge. It's such a huge record. It's just sonically incredible. It sounds so good. It feels so real and just like accessible. And I had no idea that those drums and bass parts were programmed. I had no idea. I'm shocked.
Most people don't know. I know. And then we had to hire the right band to go perform it live. But yeah.
But you tricked everybody, because at the beginning of What You Do to My Body, there's a countdown with somebody with sticks, and they drop the sticks, right? And then the song begins. So you think it's a real drummer for sure.
That was Lenny DeRose, our engineer.
Too funny. That's so funny.
Yeah.
Oh, it's such a great album. I love, though, that you did put your foot down, and that you worked with people that really truly believed in you. Like I always say, to find the right producer, I think you got to find somebody that is a fan of what you're doing, that really loves what you're doing, that sees beauty in what you're writing and what you're trying to create. And it's not up to the producer to completely change what it is that you're doing. It's up to the producer to take what you're doing and maybe add 10% on top of that 100% that you're doing to make it even better than you could have done just completely on your own. But to find somebody who just doesn't even like any of your songs, that's the real kicker right there. That's the real hint that you should probably not be working with this particular person as production choice.
It's not a big criticism of the label. I want to emphasize that. They were doing their job. And back in the 80s, it was an industry where a whole ton of money could be made off selling physical product. It was, I mean, obviously that whole industry has fallen apart now, but back then there was a huge amount of commerce involved. And so for them to go, well, if you're not going to work with the guy that has a track record of making hit records, why would we give our, artists in their 20s a $250,000 budget? Fair enough. I get it. I get that. But in the end, it ended up working out. And I agree with you completely. Like, when you work with a producer, it has to be someone who sees your vision. And I like what you said about being a fan as well. Because that's having like a real deep understanding of what you do, if that makes sense,
Mm-hmm.
I often say, even when you're songwriting, like we used to get sent on songwriting trips. They'd send us to LA or they'd send us to Nashville. When we would take a writing hiatus away from touring, where you're living off your publishing dollars, your advance, right? And they would go, well, we think you should go to LA and write with this guy or write with that guy, because he just wrote hits for this person. But that's no guarantee that it's going to work for you. When you're co-writing with a complete stranger, it's like going, it's like getting into a change booth and trying on swimsuits together. It's a very vulnerable process, right? Allowing someone to hear your deepest, darkest thoughts or your song ideas for the first time. Is this person going to think that I suck? Are they going to notice my cellulite? Do you know what I mean? It's kind of that process is the way I describe it. It's just very, very vulnerable. And sometimes, when you're thrown into a room with a person in Nashville, you've never met this person before, and you're expected to spend a day together and come up with a hit song. You might be afraid to let them know your deepest, darkest song ideas or your most vulnerable thoughts, or, because they're not your best friend. You're not comfortable yet, You must get that, right?
Oh, I totally get that. I really do. Like, I love it when I'm working with someone, if I have more than one day to work with them, because on the first day, it's the exact, I relate everything to food, Lee. I really do. And it's kind of like when you make a meal on the first day, it's okay. It's good. But when you put it back into the fridge and then you come back the next day to eat it, it tastes 10 times better. Something's happened in that fridge overnight that was magic, where it's just all those flavors just mixed in together, and it's really, really good. So it's the same way when you're writing with someone. If you can write over 3 days or over 4 days or 5 days, you get to find out how you work together. It's the first day is kind of weird. It's like, yeah, it's okay. It was all right. But the next day that you go back in, each other a little bit more. Maybe you meet for breakfast before you start writing, and you get talking about life. And you don't even talk about music at all. And the more you connect with each other that way, I find it so hard to just go into a room and say, hi, I'm so-and-so, let's write. Because then you haven't shared anything. You haven't bonded over anything at all. And you just need those real great moments where you're stuck in the fridge together and the juices are flowing, and it's just you get the great songs that way, I find, for sure.
No, absolutely. I hear you. I remember we had gone to Nashville at one point in time, and again, I'm not going to mention any names, but we were on a 4-day schedule. I think each day we were writing with a different person. And I remember getting into this. We obviously didn't come up with a song on this particular day, but we met this gentleman on his little home studio, and he's going, yeah, I got this idea. I was thinking about you. And his idea for this song was called Skin Deep. And it was sexy. And I was going, and I'm going, is that what you think of me? Is that was what his takeaway from his idea of Lee Aaron. And it just set the whole writing day off kind of like not on a great foot for me. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And Yeah, so it ended up not. We didn't produce anything fabulous on that particular day, but yeah, yeah, songwriting can be certainly a vulnerable process, right?
Oh, I've got so many great stories. I once was flown to Barbados to work for a week for an artist, and there were 9 of us that were flown from around the world to go and work with this artist. And the first day I get there, after traveling, I'm in session, and my co-writer comes in, and it's just like a tornado, almost, just like coming in and just like, complaining at the fact that producers are all terrible people, and they all take too much of the publishing of the song, and let's start writing now. And she's like, what do you got? What do you got? And so I had nothing. I'm like, I'm a blank slate sort of person. I like to have a discussion first.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And she said, well, I don't care. Just play me something. So I literally just played a C on the piano. And she said, no, that's way too sad. And then I thought, oh man. Then I played an A, and she said, oh, that's much better. Thank you. Let's start from there. And I thought, man, we are going to have the worst day today writing. However, we ended up writing a great song, because after that we started talking and conversing and bonding, and then we could write the good stuff after that, But yeah, I've got so many stories, crazy stuff.
Oh, that's wild.
Yeah. Well, let me ask you then, because
Sure.
Body Rock was such a massive album, and that was you taking the reins and working with everybody that you love to work with. What was it like doing the album after? I mean, they must have just been blown away at the fact that it was just such a huge record. And were you given absolutely like full control over the next record? Was it even a question? Was the label still trying to find other producers for you, or how did that work?
Yeah, so it's funny how you how people's perceptions of things are different. Um, after the album, after they heard the tracks, then all of a sudden there was a tremendous amount of excitement about. They were like, "Oh my gosh, they actually produced something that sounds unbelievably good here, and there's going to be some hit singles from this." And it's funny because back in the day, it suddenly it morphed into, well, this was kind of our idea all along, to let you go do this and do your thing, and
Right.
it's it's the age old story of if it's a failure, it's your idea, and if it's a success, it's their idea, right? It was their idea all along. So I'm happy to share in the credit for the success of that album, that for sure, because when they heard the material, and they heard that there were definitely going to be spawning some hit singles here, then a lot of money and a lot of effort and care was put into the video production side of things. But that's an interesting story as well, because I know that when we were getting ready to make the videos, at that point in time, I guess I'd earned a bit of trust with the label, which was lovely. And so I got to sit in the room, and I got to look at reels of a bunch of different video producers and decide who I wanted to work with.
Oh, cool.
And at that point in time, most of those 80s videos were very, especially in the hard rock genre, were very, gloomy and dark and fire and brimstone. And I didn't want to do anything like that. I thought, no, this is a hard rock pop record, and it's, Body Rock had a tremendous amount of pop sensibility, that album, and looking at those reels, I saw one reel, and it was a gentleman named Don Allen. He had a company called, I believe it was Revolver Pictures in Toronto, and he had done a L'Oreal hair commercial that was, I just loved the lighting, and I loved the movement, and it was all white, clean white background. And I said, that's what I want. That's what I see for my video, is something really fresh and fun and vibrant and colorful, and not the doom and gloom, fire and brimstone.
It's the total opposite video from Metal Queen, if you think about it. Metal
completely.
Queen. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I was really wanting to do something completely different. And so I decided we were going to work together based on this hair commercial. And I remember telling him, that's what I want. And of course, Body Rock and Hands On and those videos were the result in the end. And I was tremendously happy with them.
I was blown away by those videos too when I was first watching them. I just thought they are very, very different. They're very clean, but it just very powerful as well. And just the nice thing about shooting against the white background is that you and the band were just so present, you know, like there was nothing else other than you and the instruments, and there was no other background that you were competing against. It was very, very striking video, very, very interesting choice for that, but very successful results.
And you know, there was obviously what you do to my body. There was a lot of tongue-in-cheek element of fun to that. So I didn't want it to be perceived as I'm taking myself super seriously. You know, we got a bunch of good-looking biker gents, but we had them holding puppies and babies, and so that people would be in on the joke, if that makes sense.
Absolutely, absolutely. Oh, that was such a great moment. I love all that music and the video work that you did. I'm blown away. All the records that you've done, 17 albums in your career. Can I ask you, how has the music changed over the years? I know you've been doing a lot of hard rock and then you've returned to hard rock, but did you have any departure from hard rock at all into other genres? Did that ever happen?
I mean, no secret, in the 90s when grunge happened, pretty much everyone who was involved in, you know, I hate to say big hair music, but, classic rock, their careers kind of fell off the edge of a cliff because the whole industry changed. And when the industry changes, the media changes. And when the media changes, they want to support what's happening in the forefront of pop culture. And it wasn't classic rock at that time. So grunge rose to the forefront. And you really couldn't get arrested making traditional Lee Aaron records. So I made a couple of albums in the 90s, a few albums in the 90s. They weren't as commercially well received as some of my other, but I have to say, I'm still extremely proud of that work. In 94, I made an album called Emotional Rain. And because, you got to remember at that point in time, I was, when grunge happened, I was barely 30 years old. And I felt like I was just getting going with my successful part of my career. So I was, and I was a fan. I was a fan of Nirvana and Green Day. And the wonderful thing is that it suddenly became okay for women to pick up guitars and make hard rock music. We had the Pixies and the Breeders and Hole and Alanis, a fellow Canadian. All of a sudden she had her success in the 90s. And I was like, I'm loving this music. I'm a fan. Lee Aaron, I can pivot. So I hired the rhythm section from a band called Sons of Freedom. I don't know if you remember that band. They were a fabulous West Coast band in that scene. And I was a huge fan. I hired them to come and play on my next record, which was Emotional Rain. And I brought up Knox Chandler, was a guitarist from the Psychedelic Furs, and I had Reeves Gabrels, who was in David Bowie's Tin Machine. And I made this album called Emotional Rain, which was like a very pop, grungy Lee Aaron record. Many of my fans tell me that that's one of their favorite albums of mine. But it was very hard because I started so young, and when I was a teenager in 1982 doing hard rock, the Canadian industry stood up and noticed because there weren't any women doing that. So people had been hearing my name for a decade already. So I wasn't the new girl, the new kid on the block, right? And so the industry just wasn't interested in giving me the support at that point in time that they were with previous albums, which was disheartening for me, I must say, but it didn't stop me from moving forward and still trying to create. And then I made another album in 95 with the complete Sons of Freedom. I wrote that album with them called Too Precious. And again, I thought some of my favorite work that I did is on that album. So I did continue to make albums into the 90s. They just weren't as commercially well received because I couldn't get the industry support. Then I took a couple of years off. 1 year in particular, 96, I didn't really do much. Came back in 97 and kind of licked my wounds because it was disheartening to put all that time and effort and energy into making those records it was really difficult, again, like I said, to rally support from radio and publications across Canada. And during that time off, I just dug deep and I listened to a lot of my old jazz and blues records, the kinds of things that I used to listen to when I was doing musical theater in high school. Mm-hmm. And a friend of mine was just like, you love Nina Simone. Well, you should just be singing this kind of stuff. And so I started working with a piano player in the Vancouver. I'd moved to the West Coast by that point in time. Started working with a piano player out here. And I just started doing a few little club gigs doing jazz and blues. But then suddenly word got out that I was doing jazz and blues, and the Sun showed up and the Province and a whole bunch of newspapers. And suddenly it was all splashed in all the papers that Lee Aaron was now doing jazz and blues. And again, that just became a little bit of an upward trajectory for me as well. I continued to play nightclubs in the Vancouver area, and then suddenly there was interest in having me do jazz and blues festivals. And then it became very apparent I needed to do a jazz and blues album. So in 2000, and I guess that year as well would have been the year that I started really investing in production, and more out of necessity than anything else, because it became apparent that I needed to make a record of this kind of material. I was getting invited to play jazz and blues festivals across the country. But I didn't even have a record deal at that point in time. I had very little to work with financially. So I'm like, okay, well, I can go buy Pro Tools. I can figure this out, right? And so it really became out of necessity, being broke, not really having a budget. I taught myself how to use Pro Tools, and I made a record in my bedroom pretty much. And that was Slick Chick. And I produced it myself. And then I ended up getting a deal on, I learned enough about the industry at that point in time where I was like, no, actually, you know what? I don't actually want a record deal where they have a lot of creative input. What I want to be the record label, and I want to find a distributor that will put my albums in stores in Canada. And so I got a distribution deal in Montreal with a label at the time called Just in Time, Fusion 3. And they put my album in the stores across Canada. And Slick Chick did surprisingly well. And I remember a year later getting a big check in the mail going, oh, cool, I guess I can make another record. And I did my next album the same way. I took a group of musicians into a bigger studio to do the bed tracks, but then I brought all those bed tracks home in Pro Tools and recorded all my vocals and all my overdubs and everything myself at home, and then took it back into the big studio to work with a mixer to do the mixes. And so I came up with this sort of system in the early 2000s of a cost-effective way to make great records, which is bed tracks in a big studio where you can do your drums there, bring it home, learn the software yourself, do all your overdubbing at home, and then take it back into the studio and spend a week in the studio doing your mixes on a big console with some proper outboard gear. And yeah.
You don't know how happy that makes me to hear that. And that's also Pro Tools in the year 2000. Like, it's not that easy to learn back then, and very limited as to what it could do back in those days. But for you to learn it and to make it rock and to record yourself, you were vocal producing yourself at the same time as recording yourself and hitting all the buttons. And that's a really tricky thing to do, to record yourself and run Pro Tools at the same time and get it sounding great.
Well, yeah, I ended up, I love an SM7, and I bought myself, I've had that mic, I don't know how many years now. It's my vocal mic of choice. Forgiving, somewhat forgiving, but sounds fantastic and makes you sound really natural. And I'm still using it today. I'm not working in Pro Tools anymore. I'm actually working in Logic now because I just prefer a lot of the stuff that Logic. I find it a little more user-friendly, and I also prefer a lot of the software that and the sounds that are built into Logic that you can use with your controller, and the capabilities that gives you. But yeah, but that's me hand holding an SM7 with a pop screen on it to record my vocals.
Good for you, though. I'm so happy to hear that. And I know that it came out of necessity, but it's a great skill to have to be able to produce yourself and to have the vision and just know exactly what your sound is and how to get it and how to know to go in and get all the bed tracks done first and bring it home, do your editing, bring it back in. You save so much time and energy, and it is truly a representation of how you want to sound. It's you at the controls, which is great.
Absolutely. I don't think I could ever see myself going back and doing a record another way now.
No.
But I've been blessed, I have to say. The last couple of albums that I've done, like in 2020 when we recorded Radio On, we had gone into a studio called Afterlife here in Vancouver, which is the old Mushroom Studios. And it was just me and the band and a couple of engineers, and we recorded all our bed tracks. Obviously, you need engineers because I can't be up there and singing at the same time. Right. But we did all our bed tracks and brought them back and finished all of our tracks at home. And then I knew I had a really unique sounding special album, and I was having so much anxiety about I need a great mixer for this record. And Dave Reimer, our bass player, had come home from some industry event, and he called me. He goes, yeah, I was just, I know you're looking for a mixer and you're stressing about it a lot, but I was just at some industry event, and guess who I ran into? I ran into Mike Fraser, and we got talking, and I told him I played in Lee Aaron, and he was just like, I'm a huge Lee Aaron fan. I've never got to work with her, and I would love to work with her. And I had no idea that Mike was a fan because I was totally intimidated to phone him. Because this is like one of the biggest engineer mixers in the world. He's worked with the biggest rock bands out there, let's be honest. Yeah. But I phoned him up, and I felt like I was 5 years old and phoning him up going, hi, Mike Fraser, this is Lee Aaron. And I heard you were interested in maybe working with me. And I'm so glad that I did. And I got over my little hump of being nervous because not only is he just a fantastic mixer, but he's just one of the nicest guys in the world. And, you were talking about cooking. Mike loves to cook. In fact, that's one of the things we did. We broke bread in the studio quite a bit. He loves the idea of doing a communal meal. He's like, I'll marinate the salmon and you bring the salad and the other assistant engineer will bring the potatoes, and he loves to use the analogy of cooking when he mixes. He said he looks at it, it's just like cooking in that bringing in different sounds and different flavors and different spices into the mix when he's mixing. And yeah. I'm not a fantastic cook, so I found that fascinating,
Yeah, there's so many things that relate to food and music. Is it the two go hand in hand? Absolutely. I'm a terrible cook as well, but I definitely love to be on the receiving end of somebody who likes to cook for sure. You took a bit of a hiatus to raise your family. Yes. But then when you came back, you've since done 5 records since returning, which is so impressive. Since 2016 is when your first record dropped. Is that when that happened? When you came back?
Yeah, we've actually. I'm just trying to think. I think we've done 6, haven't we?
6 records. Okay.
We did a Christmas album as well. I don't know if you're counting that one or the live one.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, there's a live one and a Christmas.
Well, even more. You've done 6 records, not 5, 6.
So
You're on fire. You like, it's amazing. I love that you are just nonstop writing, producing, releasing, and keep going. It's great.
Yeah, um, since I wanted to start making, I always knew I would come back and start making records again, but I was waiting until my children were old enough to not be traumatized by a few hours of absence. It's pretty intense, when you are it's like writing a book. You need a lot of creative time and energy to put into creating a whole body of work. And when our children were little, I just felt that most of my creative energy was going into making peanut butter sandwiches and craft dinner and reading nighttime stories and making puppet shows in the bathtub. And you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
You know the drill.
Oh, do I ever?
Oh my God, it taps a tremendous amount of your creative energy. I mean, I'm glad that I invested that time because my children are just incredibly creative people now, and they think outside the box because, again, like I did things like did complete puppet shows with characters while they were in the bathtub and entertaining them and things like that. But
and they'll never forget that as well. They'll never forget those years that they had together with you, and they still have together with you. But now it's great for them to see their mother still chasing that dream, still doing what you love to do and still releasing and being very passionate about something in this world. That's a great thing for children to see in their parents.
Well, our daughter is in her second year at Capilano University here, and it's a intensive theater, musical theater program. And like 500 kids from across North America auditioned to get into that program. And I think they accept about 22, and she got in.
Wow.
She's I can't say enough things about that girl. She's incredibly talented. And I feel like I didn't really do anything. I feel she's never allowed me to give her a singing lesson. She's very single-minded. And, I'd go, I can give you some pointers. No, thank you, Mom. No, thank you. I can do it by myself. And she's incredibly talented. And our son plays guitar and he's starting to write songs. I always joke around with my daughter and say, some moms might teach you to make, this fabulous curry dish, but I taught you to use logic, and now you can record yourself. And, I know everybody in this family wishes I would cook more, but come on,
Right. There's Uber. Come on.
Yeah. And, she gave me a daytimer a couple of years ago. And I of course, it's not 2021 anymore, but I ripped the cover off and I kept it. I keep it up in my office for inspiration because it says, some women fear the fire, some women simply become it. Wow. And she gave that to me, and I thought it just meant so much to me because I thought that's her way of telling me, Mom, you've given me the fire, you've passed it along, you've given me this passion in my life and encouraged me to pursue it. And that's the greatest compliment she could ever give me is, I want to instill a passion for life, a passion for the arts into my children. That's my greatest job, right?
That's you once again inspiring the next generation, inspiring other females to get out there, inspiring the youth to get out there and follow their dreams and do what they are meant to be doing here on this planet. It's great. You are nonstop doing that. And you've been doing that since the beginning of your career. It's very, very admirable. Speaking of that, as I know we're running out of time and I want to make sure that I get this from you if possible. Do you have any great advice that you would give to anybody who would love to follow the same path as you and to be in your shoes at some point in their career?
Oh boy, I get asked this once in a while, and yeah, there are no stupid ideas. There's no dumb ideas. I always say this to my son, just, don't self-criticize, don't self-edit before you've even gotten an idea out the gate. For every brilliant, well, maybe not Dylan, but for every brilliant song that you hear, that artist probably wrote 8 or 10 bad ones, or not great ideas. Not every idea is brilliant. There is definitely something to be said for having a work ethic, and just, 50% of it is just doing the work. It's just not being afraid to sit down there and putting in the time. So yeah, that's what I would say. Don't beat yourself up because not every idea that you put down is brilliant. You should hear some of the things in my iPhone memo feature that are just, I'm like, oh, somehow I thought that sounded pretty good last night. That's just a complete load of crap, and, but on to the next one. Oh, that one's pretty good, so I just don't, I got past, I guess, after motherhood and, parenthood just puts you through the fire like nothing else in your life, as you well know. And I just stopped being so hard on myself at a certain point, and it was just like, yeah, maybe that's not a brilliant idea, but I'm going to put it down anyway. So just don't be afraid of your own ideas. There's probably some brilliance in there. And also, don't be afraid. And I think it's extremely valuable. Women should be learning music software. Learn some music software so that you can put your ideas down and program a drum beat and write a little bass line, so that you can bring your ideas into some sort of fruition. Right? It's such a valuable tool. And also then when you go into a studio, you actually have some knowledge and you know what you're talking about when you want to hear something a certain way or something's not working for you. You have the vocabulary to be able to explain it to whoever you're working with, to an engineer or someone. I think that's extremely valuable, yeah, just, putting in the work, using social media, learning to use it to your advantage. I struggled with this a bit because I didn't grow up in the social media age. Neither did you, really. Mm-hmm. I mean, I had a rotary telephone when I was a kid, and, I know a lot of people, my generation, that they just don't bother with it because they think it doesn't apply to them. But it does. It does. And I mean, if you want to gain any new fans, I think it's extremely important to be able to use some of this new technology and to be able to use it even to reach your old fans. We are a band, believe it or not, because I've continued to make records. When I go out and tour live now, yes, of course I play all the old Lee Aaron hits, but probably 50% of my show is new material. Not a lot of legacy artists are able to do that, but it's because we, number one, continue to put value on the idea of making new music. A lot of legacy artists don't think it's worthwhile because am I making money off my new records? No, I'm not, but that's not the point of doing them for me at this point in juncture in my career. If I make back enough to continue to keep the ball rolling and make another record, I'm doing it because I just love the creative process. And this is what I was born to do. I love making music. I love producing music. It's what I do. And I also want to leave a legacy for my children. I don't want them to go, oh, my mom's career ended in 1991, that I was never capable of producing anything beyond that. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And I have a great team of people I'm working with right now. I love my band. They're wonderful, wonderful guys, and they have wonderful ideas. And I have some wonderful creative teammates that it's just fun to make music with, It's still fun for me. And that's really, really important, I think. And I'm still a fan. I still love discovering new music. And I love, stay a fan. That would be another essential piece of advice. never forget to stay a fan of music and to be discovering new music, because interestingly enough, and I don't want to give away the big reveal because we're making a record right now, another new record. In fact, that's what I've been working on the last couple of weeks since I've gotten off the road.
Amazing.
But it's not an original album. It's going to be a covers album, because the guys in the band and I thought, wouldn't it be fun to just go do our own versions of a bunch of music that was either influential to us or that we just love because we just love it. So let's just do it, because we're fans. And when it started out as a project where I was thinking that it needed to be extremely specific. It needed to be, albums from the 70s that were influential to me as a teenager. But the more I started digging into it and the more discussions we started having as a band, we realized that no, there's music from the 2000s that's still influenced to me. There was music and quite a bit of 90s music that I was in love with that influenced me. And then, so we decided at halfway through the project, we were just going to throw out all the self-imposed rules we put on ourselves and went, let's just do music that we like. Let's just cover music that's songs that are fun for us and music that we liked. And there's some, I'm not going to tell you what, but there's some surprising choices on this album that make me really excited just to talk about.
I get that. I see the excitement in you. I hear it in your voice as well. You're just so excited about the future and being a fan of music always. And just that level of excitement is boy, oh boy, I feel it as well. I can't wait to hear it. Can't wait to hear what you do. I can't wait to hear all the new records that you're going to be putting out. It's just amazing. I'm blown away at your career. I'm blown away at your sense of drive and determination and just, loving technology and getting in there and producing and getting your hands dirty with every single aspect of making records. We didn't even talk about video making currently because all of your recent videos are really cool. They're really, really well done. And just, I love that you feature the band. You're in there. It's just all cool animations that are going on, 3D animation.
You'd be very surprised to know how we've done some of those videos, if you're interested.
Sure.
Well, number one, we have a wonderful video producer and director. His name is Frank Greiner. He's actually M. Greiner's brother.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, I know Frank.
Unbelievably talented gentleman. He actually mixed our Christmas album as well. And he's going to be mixing this new album we're doing as well.
Great.
And he's just a jack of all trades and brilliant at all of them. And one of the things that he does is he's very adept at digital technology and doing all that digital animation. And we worked together with him where he would map out like a shot list, say for me, at home and explain to me exactly how he wanted it framed, exactly the frames per second that I should be shooting it at. And I just bought a green screen off Amazon and used my iPhone 14 on 60 frames a second and did all the shots that he had requested. And of course, we discussed concept first. We conceptually what we were hoping to achieve with the video, and then I just shoot all this footage, upload it to him, and give it to him, and he runs with it. So all of our more recent videos, believe it or not, were actually shot with iPhone technology.
That's amazing. And
given to Frank, who again is brilliant. And he does all the digital animations for us. And he's just, I can't say enough wonderful things about him we just consider him part of our creative team now.
Very cool. Very cool.
Yeah.
Oh, it's amazing what you can do with just the stuff that you have at your disposal. Everyone's got an iPhone or something equivalent, and the cameras are very powerful and just amazing that you can do that. Completely. I love the backstory because these videos are very, very impressive if you go and watch these videos, which I know you have and I have, but they're really, really well done, really well put together, and just they look great. They look great. Absolutely.
Well, thank you.
Lee, Erin, thank you so much from the bottom of my heart for donating some of your precious time to be on this podcast. I'm a huge fan. You've always been so kind in our communications, and I appreciate that as well. I would love to have a part 2 with you at some point where we could talk about other music and other inspirations. I know that there's a lot more that we could talk about for sure. So if you're down with that, I'll be knocking on your door at some point in the future.
Well, absolutely. I would love that. This has been really, really fun.
Yeah, likewise. I so appreciate it. Thank you so much. And I hope you have a great day. And thank you to everyone for listening to another episode of Women in the Music Industry with my good friend, Lee Erin.
Awesome. Let's talk soon.
Okay. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Stay tuned for the next episode of Women in the Music Industry, coming soon. Let's embark on this incredible journey together, celebrating the women who are reshaping the music business one note at a time. If you enjoyed hearing this podcast, please take a moment and give it a like, a rating, or a follow. Your support helps immensely. We'll see you next time.